I think it was the dog's skull that finally made me scream. I remember seeing it, sticking out from that muddy pit or crater or whatever, that big hole that was left when the biggest tree finally fell down. I saw it there, all white and jutting out of the mud, and I remember it made me think of when you get your first proper teeth and they start to cut up through the gums, a little point of white sticking up from below. Half of it was still in the soil, but the bit that was sticking out was totally covered with tiny roots. There was one, a big thick root that looked like the body of a snake that had gone right through the dog's empty eye socket. It had wrapped around the top of the skull, and it looked like it was sort of pulling or taking it, dragging it down into the soil as if it wanted to save it, to finish eating it later. I remember looking at that root wrapped around the bone, and I remember seeing, just like the others did, that the root was still moving, slithering and sliding through that eye socket, all slow and deliberate, like a python or something, gliding through. It was still moving because it was still hungry. It isn't like I didn't try to tell people. Months earlier, I did try to tell them. I think the most annoying thing about it wasn't that they never believed me. It was that instead, they would try to tell me what I actually meant. That really wound me up. They'd say these stupid things in their stupid sing-song voices and put emphasis on certain words like I was some kind of moron or still in primary school or something. "You mean the wind," they'd say. "The wind in the leaves of the tree sounded like whispering," or their other favorite. "You mean the rustling, like in the bushes? You mean that the rustling sounded like voices and made it seem like the tree was talking?" "No, Karen, I don't mean that. I don't mean that at all. When I said that the tree was whispering, that creepy old oak or you or the black-looking one in Milton's Park used to whisper, that it would talk and make sounds and words at night, that is what I meant. That is what I meant exactly. Not the wind, not some animal fumbling around in the bushes, the tree. Still, they all got it in the end. I mean, imagine you're me. Imagine you're halfway through your paper route. It's 5 a.m., and the sun isn't up yet. It's cold and it's drizzling, and all you really want to do is get home and back to bed for an hour or two before your mom wakes you up for college. Imagine you're there at the edge of Milton's Park. Now, you know that you could walk around, that you could take the outside route and still finish on time, but you also know that doing that would take an extra 15 minutes, and obviously you don't want to waste that much time. So you go in to cut across the park. You jump the metal fence and almost catch the bag full of paper on it as you do. Then you start walking as quickly as you can, without breaking into a run, through the park. Now, if you were with other people, your mates or your parents, you'd walk slowly. If it was daytime, you wouldn't be worried at all about going through the park. But on your own in the dark. It's different. Now you want to be up that path and across the park as quickly as possible. It's not that you're scared of the dark necessarily. It's just when you're going through at night, there's a lot of dark around, and it isn't nice dark either. It's the kind of dark that seems like it's been waiting for you, you know? Like it means you harm. So you speed up, you start breathing a bit heavier, and you can hear your own footsteps, all short and quick on the gravel path, and they sound massive because you're the only one making any sound. Around you, everything else is quiet, all still, like the world's been put on pause. You keep going, knowing that the next part will be the worst because you're coming to the little path where everything gets narrow and where the trees hang over, so it's almost like a tunnel. That's the bit you hate most because it's darker there. The trees block the light as if they don't want people to see what they're up to. You hate those trees. Not just because they block out the light, but because they hang over and they droop down as if they're trying to touch you. You know it's daft and babyish, but the branches with their big long fingers remind you of those drawings that scared you as a kid. The ones in the Mother Goose books of the witch in her gingerbread house, with her long, thin fingers all bent up like claws. You get to the little path, and for a minute you think of running, bombing it through and getting to the other side as quickly as possible. But you don't, because you're worried about tripping over the roots or breaking your ankle in the dark and ending up having to stay out here. So instead, you do this half-walk, half-run, quickly down the little path, quickly with the trees, sort of leaning, crowding in on either side. And you keep looking dead ahead even though you can feel them on either side, and feel them watching and straining with their long branch arms and their thin twig fingers towards you. Imagine yourself there. Then imagine that you hear one of them speak. At first, you think there's someone there, some other person crouching in the dark waiting for you to come along. You spin around and look, but there's nobody there, just the trees and the wall of black between them. Then you hear it again, coming from the big one, the oldest. It's reaching up in front of you, featureless, mouthless, and yet speaking. The first time I heard it, it said my name, whispered it soft and low. It's weird, but even though it scared me, even though my blood ran cold, the voice itself was not awful. In fact, it was soft and sort of sweet. I know it doesn't make sense, but it made me think of twinkling lights, like hundreds of tiny highlights, like crystals or gems or something, all gently glistening. The voice scared me, but in a horrible way. I almost liked it. It was as if, on the surface, the voice was beautiful, but you knew, deep down, that there was something awful hiding below. The voice coming from the oldest tree also came outstretched. It was like a piece of taffy someone was pulling, the words all long and warped. It said my name. It said it like it knew me, as if it had always known me in this nice, sweet way, and it told me if I went with them, I could sleep and rest. Come with us, it said. Sleep beneath the soil. So long, so sweet, so sweet. I remember that for a second, it did sound sweet. I stood stock still and waited to hear that beautiful voice again, but then I came back to my senses, standing there in the damp and the rain with those cold, damp fingers, the wet of moss and bark reaching out toward me, and suddenly, I could see it. I could see myself, under the soil, in the earth, beneath the mud, with the roots coiling around me, slipping like worms into my mouth and my nose, searching and groping blindly into every nook and cranny of my flesh. Me trying to scream with my mouth filled with tiny roots as the tree began to feed, squeezing the life as it sucked with thirst at my fat and juices, rotting my insides, dissolving them to mush to be slowly absorbed. I saw my eyeballs suddenly implode, the fluid slurped by some tendril of a root. I saw all that and I ran. Behind me, the tree continued to call, to whisper gently and try to tempt me back. I told people this. I told tons of people, teachers, friends, and even my parents. All of them thought I was either lying, attention-seeking, or mad, until the night of the storm. When that big storm hit, the one they called the beast from the east that pulled tiles off roofs and toppled the fences, I knew and hoped that it would hit the trees. Those massive things had stood for decades, and they were heavy on top. If the wind was strong enough, it would catch and pull them. Sure enough, the force of the gale dragged them down, pulled those monsters up by their roots. The trees uprooted lay collapsed on their sides. I went down to Milton's Park. That's when I saw the dog's skull, and the others saw it all. I remember the skull of that dog, the root sliding through it. But that was only one. Below the soil, snared up in the roots, totally hidden until the wind made them visible, there were hundreds. Dogs, cats, birds, and more. Hundreds of tiny skeletons, all with the roots tangled around them, clutching them, like some weird gripping hands or one of those massive hunting spiders that will dive on a mouse and then fold its legs around it. Some said the remains were old. Maybe in the Victorian days they used this area as a place to bury animals, like a pet cemetery or something. Anyway, that theory was shot down when they found microchips in the soils as well. Animals that had been tagged only a few years ago and that had gone missing from the local towns. Some said there was no way that the roots could have wrapped that quickly, that to wrap around a carcass like that would take years, until they saw them moving, slithering along through the mud like they were searching without eyes, through the soil, looking for prey. For a while that morning, the people in town were talking about this being on the news, about how it was a great discovery and some kind of scientific breakthrough, right up until they saw that one of the bones had a diamond ring still attached. The idea that a tree might hunt, that it might reach up with long, thin roots and ensnare an animal like a fly stuck in a web, dragging it under to dissolve and chew, is awful. But it's worse when it's not just animals. When you allow that idea to be a possibility, the thought that the trees might whisper, to tempt and call people toward them, just like those Venus flytraps tempt the insects in, it doesn't sound quite so far-fetched. Not that I can prove it. An hour after the first human body was found, encased beneath the roots, A group of guys came to the park with lighters and cans of petrol. If the thing was still moving, they figured, then the thing could still be alive. It isn't alive anymore. The trees in Milton's park were set alight by the residents and burnt until they were ashes.